I was fixing a loose hinge on the garden shed when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Maybe it was the way the morning air felt heavier than usual. I wiped my hands on my shirt and picked up. Mr. Langston? The voice was calm, professional. This is Amira Benton, legal representative for the estate of Celeste Ward. I'm calling to inform you that Miss Ward has passed, and you've been named in her will. We'll be holding a reading at 10 a.m. this Friday at Whitmore and Finch Law. Attendance is required. I stood there frozen, the screwdriver slipping from my hand and landing in the dirt. Celeste is dead? I asked. Yes, she said gently. I'm very sorry for your loss. But it didn't feel like sympathy, it felt like procedure. I'll be there, I said, barely hearing myself. Thank you, Mr. Langston. Please don't be late. Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone long after the call ended. Celeste. Dead. The woman who used to look me in the eyes like I was a stepping stone she hadn't meant to trip on. Gone. No goodbyes, no warning. And now I was being summoned like a forgotten relic from her past. Not invited, required. The shed, the tools, the day, they all blurred out. I just stood there, surrounded by silence that didn't belong to me, and for the first time in years, I wasn't sure what to feel. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with an old photograph in my hand. One of the few I hadn't thrown out or buried in a box. Celeste was smiling in it. Barely. That calculating half-smile she wore when she knew something you didn't. I remembered seeing it in court the day our divorce was finalized. I also remembered it on our wedding day. Strange how the same expression can feel like a kiss one moment and a knife the next. I poured a bit of whiskey into a chipped glass and leaned back. Why me? Why now? Celeste wasn't the type to leave loose ends. If she named me in her will, it wasn't sentiment. It was strategy. Just as I was settling into that bitter thought, there was a knock at the door. Late, unexpected. I opened it and saw him, Darren, my son. Tall, polished, dressed like money. He didn't say hi, just stepped inside like he owned the air between us. You got the call? He asked. I nodded. I don't know what she was thinking, he snapped, bringing you into this. I didn't flinch. She didn't run it by me either. Darren started pacing like he had somewhere better to be. She wanted this clean, simple. You just complicate things. I almost laughed, but it would have sounded too much like crying. She's gone, Darren, I said quietly. Maybe this is just closure. He turned to me, jaw clenched. There's $34 million on the line. This isn't about closure. That number hit me like a brick. She was worth that much? I muttered. She built Ward Industries from nothing. Of course she was. He said it like he was reciting a brand slogan, not talking about his mother. I shrugged. I'm just going to the reading, that's all. He scoffed. Just stay out of the way. Then he left. No hug, no handshake, not even a look back. When the door clicked shut, it echoed louder than it should have. I sat there in silence, trying to understand why this moment, of all moments, felt like the beginning of something. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a formality. This was the start of a storm I didn't see coming, and I had no idea who'd be left standing when it passed. The truth is, Celeste was never meant to be ordinary. Even when we were young, she carried herself like the world owed her something, and she was coming to collect. I met her at a community fundraiser in 1987. She was standing near the coffee table, arms folded, glaring at the stale pastries like they personally offended her. I walked over with some awkward joke about donuts being humanity's greatest deception. She didn't laugh, but she did smirk. Victor Langston? I introduced myself. She looked me up and down and said, Celeste? And I don't do deception. That was our first conversation. Looking back now, maybe it was also a warning. She had that rare ability to dominate a room without raising her voice. At 24, she already spoke like she'd been negotiating million-dollar contracts. She worked in local marketing then, barely scraping by, but you wouldn't have guessed it. Every word, every gesture was rehearsed power. She could walk into a job interview, sit across from 3 men twice her age, and walk out with their respect or their resignation. And I was the man who somehow made her laugh when she wasn't in the mood for people at all. Our courtship wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. Celeste didn't like flowers, said they wilted too fast. She didn't believe in handwritten letters, said they were too easy to fake, but she liked my quiet persistence. said I was too slow to lie and too stubborn to quit. That's how she put it when she agreed to marry me. Not, yes, not I love you, just, you're the first man who doesn't scare easy. Let's see if you can survive me. Marriage with Celeste wasn't soft. It was sharp edges and hard truths. We built a life brick by brick. I took a job at a logistics firm while she climbed through marketing into real estate, then flipped that into her own property brand. Ward Enterprises started with a single duplex and a lot of late-night arguments. She worked until 2 a.m. and woke at 6. The woman was fire in human form, burning everything in her way and lighting the path forward at the same time. But not everything about her was ambition. On Sunday mornings, when she wasn't buried in meetings, she'd make sourdough toast and hum old Billie Holiday songs in the kitchen. Sometimes she'd sneak up behind me while I was reading and slide her arms around my waist. "This is the only time I feel safe," she'd whisper. I didn't understand then. I thought she was invincible, untouchable. I didn't realize how much of her strength was armor, or how often she wore it because no one else offered shelter. When Darren was born, I thought maybe things would soften, and for a while they did. She'd watch him sleep with a look I'd never seen before, vulnerable, unsure. She'd trace the curve of his cheek like she was memorizing something she knew she couldn't hold on to, but even that faded. As he got older, Celeste shifted gears. She wanted him sharp, confident, polished, not kind, successful, not curious, capable. She believed love was shown through discipline, not affection. I didn't agree, but I didn't fight her on it either. That was my mistake. By the time Darren was a teenager, Celeste had become something of a myth in our city. Ward Enterprises was on every billboard, her face in business magazines, her name attached to luxury towers and development projects. She was proud of it, and she earned every bit of it. But the woman I married, the one who used to sit beside me on our broken porch steps and dream out loud, that version of her had vanished, replaced by someone who measured time in contracts and affection in loyalty. I started losing her long before the divorce. It happened in quiet increments, missed dinners, empty conversations, weekends spent working. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that ambition had its season and we'd find our way back. But months turned to years, and the space between us grew into silence we didn't dare break. I tried. God knows I tried. But Celeste didn't want repair. She wanted momentum, and I became a weight she refused to carry. The day she asked for the divorce, she didn't cry. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked at me over her coffee mug and said, "You deserve someone who wants what you want, and I can't keep pretending it's me." Then she got up, fixed her coat, and went to a meeting. I remember sitting there for hours, staring at that empty chair across the table, wondering how love that once felt so loud could leave so quietly. I kept a few things after she left. The wedding photo, the gold cufflink she forgot in the bathroom drawer, and one of her old notebooks. It was filled with scribbles and goals from when she first started Ward Enterprises. Page after page of ideas, strategies, deadlines. But on the last page, in her handwriting, there were only 7 words. "Don't lose the reason you began." I still don't know if that was meant for her or for me. Maybe both. The past few days since Amira's call, I've been haunted by all these fragments. Flashes of who Celeste was, who she became, and who I let her become. It's strange how memory works. It doesn't obey time, it obeys feeling. And right now, it's pulling me backward, toward a woman I loved and a legacy I never thought I'd be part of again. She's gone now. But her shadow still moves through my house, like she never really left. And something tells me this reading, this final act, isn't going to be about money. It's going to be about all the things we never said out loud. Our marriage wasn't the kind that showed up in picture frames or anniversary cards. It was built on momentum. 2 people sprinting toward a future neither of us had mapped clearly enough. In the early years, we were a team. Not the kind that whispered sweet nothings or lingered over dinner dates, but the kind that got things done. If the roof leaked, I fixed it. If the bank called, she handled it. We moved like clockwork, never romantic, but rarely out of sync. And for a time, that was enough. Celeste wasn't affectionate in public, and she wasn't much better in private. She showed love through plans, through goals, through progress. If she bought you a new suit, it meant she saw potential. If she critiqued your tone or your timing, it meant she was trying to sharpen you. It took me years to stop mistaking her criticism for resentment. That's just how she operated. She wasn't warm, but she was loyal to those who kept up. We bought our first house 2 years into the marriage. It wasn't glamorous, just a 2-bedroom fixer-upper with creaky floors and bad plumbing, but Celeste walked through it like she was seeing blueprints no one else could. I remember her running her fingers along the baseboards and saying, "Give me 5 years and this house will pay for our next 3. And she was right. She always was. When Darren was born, everything changed. Not for Celeste. She didn't slow down. But for me. Holding him the first time, I realized how fragile this whole life was, how easy it would be to lose the parts that actually mattered. I used to think my job was to support Celeste. After Darren, I started thinking maybe my real job was to protect what little softness we had left. He was a quiet kid, always observing, never loud. I'd catch him watching her from the hallway while she took business calls or mapped out her week on the kitchen counter. He admired her, but he also feared her. I could see it. The way he flinched when she raised her voice, or how he hesitated before asking simple questions. Celeste didn't mean to be harsh, it just came with the territory. Her world had no room for weakness, and children, by nature, are made of it. I tried to balance things out, late-night stories, pancake Sundays, long walks to the park where he could ask 100 questions without getting judged. But it wasn't enough. The louder her presence grew in his life, the smaller mine became. He wanted to impress her, not disappoint her, and slowly that desire turned into performance. By the time he was 10, Darren already had a planner. 12, and he was mimicking her tone in arguments. 14, and he had no time for me at all. Celeste encouraged it. She said I was too soft, that the world would eat him alive if he didn't toughen up. He's not your friend, Victor. He's your legacy, and legacy requires discipline. I remember standing in our kitchen, listening to her say that with absolute certainty and realizing for the first time that we weren't building a family. We were building a brand. One she wanted complete control over. We argued more in those years. Not about money, we had enough. Not even about parenting, not directly. It was always something small. A missed appointment, a forgotten chore. The tone I used when I said good morning. But under every argument was the same question neither of us could ask out loud. When did we stop being on the same side? I started spending more time at work, volunteered for late shifts, sat in my car long after the engine stopped just to breathe without expectations. Celeste noticed, but she didn't stop me. She just adjusted like she always did and moved forward without waiting. We became efficient strangers, cohabiting, co-parenting, coexisting. And then one day she told me she wanted out. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears. She came home from a conference, took off her shoes, poured herself a glass of water, and sat across from me like it was just another meeting. "This isn't sustainable," she said. "We're two executives trying to run different companies in the same building." That was her metaphor for marriage, business, logistics, strategy. I asked if she'd even tried to fix it. She said fixing things wasn't the point. "We don't love each other anymore, Victor. We respect each other. That's not enough." She was right, and I hated that. Darren took the news quietly, too quietly. He nodded when we told him. Didn't cry, didn't ask questions, just said okay and went to his room. Later, I found him staring at his mother's closed office door, like he was trying to memorize it before it disappeared. From that day forward, something changed between us. He started aligning more with her, more ambition, less warmth. He stopped asking me things and started informing me of things. And every time he called me Dad, it sounded more like a courtesy than a connection. The divorce was clean. Celeste made sure of that. She gave me the house, kept the business, and offered a monthly allowance for Darren's expenses. The court visit was less than 30 minutes, just paperwork and signatures. No drama, no accusations. It felt like closing a bank account, not a marriage. She remarried 2 years later, to a man named Elliot. Wealthy, reserved, much older. A financier with deep ties to international real estate. Darren took to him quickly. Celeste approved. She always did, like predictability. I stopped being invited to holidays after that. My calls started going to voicemail. My role became ceremonial, a birthday card, a graduation speech, a name listed under father but seldom consulted. I told myself I was doing what was best, staying out of the way, letting him thrive in the system she built. But deep down, I knew. I was just trying not to break what little was left. Now she's gone. And Darren barely looks at me like I'm family. The only connection between us is the ghost of a woman who once said we could build an empire together. Funny thing about empires, they always look strong until the day they fall. Friday came colder than expected. The sky was gray and indecisive, like it couldn't make up its mind between storm or silence. I wore my best coat, the one Celeste once picked out years ago. I almost didn't, but something told me this day wasn't just about legal formalities. It was something else. Something heavier. Whitmore and Finch was the kind of law firm that didn't need to advertise. The building stood like a monument to old money. Marble floors, oil paintings, and that sterile quiet that only comes with power. I stepped into the lobby and gave my name. The receptionist glanced up, her face unreadable, then motioned to the elevators. Second floor, end of the hall, conference room B. They're expecting you. They meant Darren, of course, and the lawyer. I walked slowly, each step echoing a little louder than I liked. The hallway smelled like leather and ink. It brought back memories I wasn't ready for. Divorce papers, courtrooms, the sound of Celeste's heels fading down a hallway just like this. I took a deep breath before turning the knob. Inside, the room was too polished to feel human. Long mahogany table, bottled water, notepads lined up with military precision. Darren was already there, dressed like a trust fund catalog. Sharp suit, no smile. He didn't stand when I walked in. Just glanced at his watch, like I was late, even though I wasn't. And then there was the lawyer. Amira Benton. Young, precise, the kind of woman who doesn't waste breath on small talk. She stood when I entered and extended a hand. Mr. Langston, thank you for coming. I nodded, shook her hand, and sat across from my son. For a moment, none of us spoke. It felt like a game of emotional chess, and I was already behind. Amira opened a folder, her tone shifting into neutral gear. As you've both been informed, Miss Celeste Ward left a final will and testament, notarized and legally binding. Today, I will read it in full as per her wishes. Darren crossed his arms. I stayed still. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to understand. She began. To my son Darren, she read aloud, I leave the following. Full control of Ward Enterprises, contingent upon a mandatory quarterly review board. This board will not include family-only independent executives. My legacy is not a playground. It is a machine, and machines require maintenance. Darren smirked. He probably thought that clause was for show. He didn't understand that Celeste didn't do anything for show. Everything she wrote had teeth. Amira continued. To Victor Langston I leave the following, and for a moment, the air in the room stiffened. A sum of $4 million, tax cleared, to be released in quarterly payments over 5 years. This is not a gift. It is a restoration. I took something from you when I walked away, and I never said thank you. The room fell silent. Darren's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His face was a slow burn, confused, offended, calculating. I stayed quiet, unsure if I'd heard it right. Celeste acknowledging me? $4 million? And the word thank you? I didn't know which shocked me more. Amira looked up. There's more. She pulled out a second page. In addition, she read, I have left a sealed letter addressed to Victor, to be read privately. It contains details regarding our divorce and decisions made thereafter. No other party is permitted access to this document. She slid a thick envelope across the table. My name was written in her familiar script, clean, elegant, final. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Darren stood. She was manipulated, he said sharply. There's no way she meant to give him that much. He hasn't been part of her life in over a decade. I handled her affairs. I ran her operations. This is insane. Amira didn't flinch. The will is legally airtight, Mr. Ward. If you wish to contest it, you're welcome to pursue a claim in court. But the terms will be enforced unless overturned by a judge. He turned to me. You're not taking that money. I looked him in the eyes, my son, my reflection, twisted by ambition, and said, I didn't ask for it, but I'm not giving it back. His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might throw the glass bottle sitting near his elbow. But instead, he grabbed his coat, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Amira closed the folder. That concludes the reading. I nodded slowly, finally reaching for the envelope. Its weight felt personal. final, like an echo from the past too loud to ignore. I slipped it into my coat pocket and stood. "Thank you," I said quietly. She nodded. "Celeste was complicated, but she was deliberate. She wanted you to have this." I stepped out of the room and into the hallway, my footsteps strangely calm. I'd walked in expecting closure. What I got was an opening. A new question, a challenge left behind by the one woman who always kept me guessing. And the worst part? A part of me was glad. The letter sat in my coat pocket like a stone. I didn't rush to open it. Instead, I drove home in silence, letting the road unfold in front of me without thinking. The city blurred by. Glass buildings, blurred taillights, people moving too fast to notice anything that mattered. I pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, and sat there. The envelope still unopened, still waiting. It had her handwriting. I hadn't seen it in years, but I'd recognize it anywhere. Clean, sharp, confident. No loops, no curves. The kind of writing that didn't ask, it declared. Just seeing it made my stomach twist. Not because I was scared of what was inside, but because part of me still wasn't ready to hear her voice again. Not like this. I walked into the house, hung up my coat, and set the envelope on the kitchen table. Then I poured myself a drink. Not to numb anything, just to mark the moment. Whatever this letter was, closure, confession, manipulation, I knew it would change something. And once I opened it, I couldn't unknow what was inside. I sat down, took a breath, and opened it. Victor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Not in a poetic way, just gone. And knowing you, you probably have a drink in your hand and 1,000 questions burning in your chest. Let me answer the biggest one first. Why you? Why anything? Because you were the only one who ever saw me before I became her. I paused. Her. That was how she saw herself? As someone else? A version? Before the company, before the boardrooms and contracts and public image, I was a girl who believed love was a weakness. I watched my father lose everything trying to keep a marriage alive that should have ended 5 years earlier. My mother drank herself numb in silence, and I promised myself I would never live like that. I wanted power. And power, Victor, doesn't leave space for softness. But you showed up anyway. You had rough hands and patient eyes. You fixed things, doors, sinks, broken plans. You smiled like nothing in this world could truly break you. And for a while I let myself believe we could be that rare thing, two people who didn't need to destroy each other to grow. I leaned back, the words hitting harder than I expected. I wasn't used to Celeste being vulnerable. Not like this. But I did destroy us, bit by bit. Not with cruelty, but with coldness. I prioritized empire over intimacy, strategy over connection, and I watched you shrink without saying a word. I knew you were hurting. I just didn't know how to stop without feeling like I was losing. The day I asked for the divorce, I already knew I was wrong, but I was too deep in the identity I'd built. Too many eyes were watching, too many hands waiting to pull me down if I stumbled. So I let you walk away, quiet, wounded, proud, and I convinced myself it was for the best. It wasn't. I had to stop reading. My eyes were glassy and my throat dry. She never said these things, not in life, not even close. Darren, he became like me. You know that. He studied me like scripture, mimicked my ambition, inherited my distance. I never told you this, but on his 16th birthday, he said to me, "I don't want to be soft like Dad." And I smiled. I actually smiled, Victor, because I thought it meant I had succeeded. But when he started cutting you out of his life, when he stopped calling, stopped listening, I realized what I had done. I didn't raise a son. I manufactured a soldier, one who only knows how to conquer. I gripped the edge of the table. My son, my boy. And suddenly, it wasn't anger I felt, it was grief. Grief for the years I'd lost. For the father I could have been if I hadn't been made to feel irrelevant. The money? That's not a gift. It's not charity. It's repayment. You gave me years I didn't deserve. You gave me love I didn't know how to return. You stayed longer than you should have, and when you left, you did it without trying to ruin me. That takes strength, the kind I never had. So yes, take the money. Use it. Burn it. I don't care. Just know, it was never about fairness. It was about recognition. I saw you, Victor, even when I pretended not to. And one more thing. Don't let Darren bury you in my mistakes. He needs to know what real strength looks like. Not the kind that controls, but the kind that forgives. The kind that lets go. If he ever comes back to you, let him. And if he doesn't, don't wait at the door. Goodbye, Victor. I hope in another life I would have chosen you more clearly. Celeste. I folded the letter and held it against my chest, as if doing so might bring back some warmth. But the house stayed quiet, empty, still. She was gone. But for the first time in years, she had spoken. And somewhere between the bitterness and the apology, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of carrying a version of her that no longer existed. Tired of fighting a past that never asked to be redeemed. I stood, placed the letter in the drawer beside the old photo of us on our wedding day, and poured the rest of the whiskey down the drain. Tomorrow, I would figure out what to do with the money. Tonight, I just needed to remember who I used to be. The morning after reading Celeste's letter felt like standing in someone else's life. I sipped coffee by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. The world outside kept moving, but inside my chest, everything had slowed to a crawl. I kept replaying her words, the ones that somehow managed to open old wounds, while also sewing something shut. She had written like someone who knew the end was coming, and had chosen her final words carefully. But it wasn't just the letter that lingered. It was Darren. The silence from him after the will reading. The way he left that room like I didn't exist. That boy used to grip my hand crossing the street. Now he couldn't look me in the eye. I hadn't lost him overnight. I'd been losing him for years. Quietly, slowly, painfully. I just didn't admit it until now. Celeste's confession made it clear. He didn't fall from me, he was pulled. And she had been the one pulling. I didn't even blame her entirely. Darren made his choices too. But somewhere along the way, my son had become a stranger in an expensive suit with my blood in his veins and no warmth left in his words. Just after noon, my phone buzzed with a message from Jonas Keene, Celeste's estate assistant. It was short and professional. Mr. Langston, there are additional items in Celeste's study. She requested you view them privately before we begin distribution. You may come by today. I didn't respond. I just got in the car and drove. The idea of stepping into Celeste's private world was unsettling. That study was a locked chamber for the entire time we were married. Even when I lived in that house, the door was off limits. Now suddenly, it was mine to enter. Ward Manor looked colder than ever. The lights were off. The garden was overgrown. It didn't feel like the home of a multimillionaire. It felt like a castle after the Queen had died. Jonas met me at the door, nodded, and led me to a hallway I didn't recognize. He handed me a small silver key. She made it clear, this room is for your eyes only. Then he turned and left. I was alone. Just me and a door I'd never touched before. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed it open. The room was smaller than I imagined. Warm, even. It wasn't the steel and glass war room I expected. One wall held books, strategy, psychology, biographies of women who built empires and burned bridges. Another wall had framed magazine covers and boardroom plaques. But the desk was what drew me in. 3 items sat on it. A sealed black folder, a wooden box with my initials carved into the top, and a picture frame turned face down. I opened the folder first. Dozens of pages. All handwritten, her notes, her thoughts, her analysis of our life together. Victor avoids conflict, believes silence is dignity. Doesn't seek revenge, just detaches. Finds value in small rituals, coffee, tools, walks. Some of it read like therapy, some of it read like surveillance. But then came the sentences that made my breath catch. He never tried to change me. He loved me with quiet I didn't know how to answer. I failed him. I placed the folder down, hands shaking, and opened the wooden box. Inside was a watch, my old leather-strapped wristwatch, the one I thought I'd lost years ago. Celeste had given it to me the day Darren was born. I flipped it over. There was a new engraving on the back, to the man who never needed a fortune to be rich. I closed my eyes. My throat tightened. She had kept it. She had planned this. Every detail, every sentence. This wasn't a guilt offering. It was a farewell. Finally, I turned the photo frame over. It was me and Darren. The last fishing trip before the divorce. He was 12, beaming, holding a fish half his size. I had my arm around him. I looked like a man who believed he still mattered in his son's life. On the back of the frame, she'd scribbled something in pen. You're his anchor. He just doesn't know it yet. That's when I sat down. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just sat there in the chair she probably used to conquer companies and crush opposition. And I realized that for all her power, Celeste had died with more regrets than I ever imagined. She didn't give me money because she owed me. She gave it because she couldn't give me time. Because the version of herself she had been building all those years didn't have the courage to love me the way I needed. And Darren had inherited all of her ambition, but none of her reflection. He had the empire, but none of the empathy. He was now the face of Ward Industries. But the truth? He was an heir to someone he never truly knew. And he was about to learn, if he ever dared to read what she left behind, that power without understanding is a lonely throne. I stood, placed everything back exactly as I found it, and turned to leave. The air felt heavier now, the silence sharper. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I wasn't heartbroken either. I was free. For the first time in a long time, I understood that Celeste's ghost wasn't going to haunt me. She'd already set me free, with her flaws, her fear, her words, and her final acts. Now it was up to Darren to decide what kind of man he'd be. I didn't expect to see Darren so soon after my visit to the study, but fate doesn't usually ask permission. It just kicks down the door. 2 days later, I was back in my own modest home, halfway through organizing the garage, when I heard the screech of tires on gravel. I looked up to see a black luxury SUV, too polished for this street, pulling into my driveway like it owned the pavement. The door swung open before the engine cut off. Darren stepped out, sunglasses on, blazer pressed, and a scowl that said he wasn't here for small talk. He didn't knock. He walked in like it was still his house, like the air here hadn't changed in the years he'd ignored it. "You went into her study," he said. No hello, no warmth, just accusation. I closed the garage cabinet slowly and turned to face him. "She asked me to," I said, calm, even. "It was her wish." Darren's jaw flexed. "That room was private. You had no right digging through her things." I took a breath and chose not to rise to his bait. "I didn't dig. I read what she left for me, that's all." He paced, hands on his hips, then spun to face me. "She was confused near the end, you know that, right? All that grief talk, the regrets, that wasn't the real her." I tilted my head. "And what exactly was the real her, Darren?" His mouth opened, then closed. He wasn't used to being questioned. Not by me. Not by anyone. "She was strong," he finally said. "She didn't believe in clinging to the past." I nodded slowly. "Strong, yes. And maybe she didn't cling. But she remembered. That matters too." Darren scoffed and moved to the kitchen, pouring himself water without asking, like old habits hadn't died. "She built everything from the ground up. And now you're here, standing in the middle of it, like you're owed something." I folded my arms. I never asked for anything. Not during the marriage, not during the divorce, and not now. He slammed the glass down. "Then why are you suddenly everywhere? Why are you in her will? Why are you in her letters?" I stared at him. "Because whether you like it or not, I was part of her life. A real part, the kind that doesn't show up on a balance sheet." He shook his head, voice rising. "No, you were a footnote. A man she outgrew. You don't get to rewrite history just because she died." I stepped forward, steady and firm. "And you don't get to erase people just because they make you uncomfortable." For a second, just one. His eyes flinched, like a mask slipping, like something cracked behind the polished surface he wore for the world. "I saw the photo," I said, softer now. "Us fishing. She kept it framed, Darren. She kept my watch. She wrote things you've never dared to read. You think you inherited everything, but you only got the gold. You missed the truth." He turned away, back rigid. "I don't care about old watches or scribbled regrets. I care about legacy, control, and making sure you don't ruin either." That was it. The real Darren, not the boy I raised, not the man I hoped he'd become. Just a name in a power suit chasing shadows of control. "You're afraid," I said, voice low, "because if people find out she still loved me in her own way, it changes your story. You're not the sole heir anymore. You're not the chosen one." He spun around, eyes burning. "Don't test me." I nodded. "That's the thing about masks, Darren. They're not meant to last forever. Eventually they slip. And what's underneath? Well, sometimes it's not nearly as strong as the mask." He stared at me for a long time, breathing hard. And then, without another word, he walked past me and slammed the door on his way out. No goodbye, no closing argument, just silence, and the smell of arrogance fading in the air. I watched him drive away, and I felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief. Just a strange peace. like I'd finally seen the truth of a man I once called my son, a truth I could no longer deny or fix. Darren had inherited a company, I had inherited clarity, and between the two, I think I got the better deal. I didn't hear from Darren again for almost a week, which, all things considered, was a blessing. That silence wasn't empty, it was loud with meaning. After our last conversation, I knew he was scrambling behind the scenes, checking every legal angle, trying to claw back control in a story that had slipped from his fingers. But I wasn't interested in a war. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted answers, ones only Celeste could give me. And she was gone. At least, that's what I thought, until Jonas Keene called again. "Mr. Langston," he said politely, "there are more materials you should see. They weren't part of the formal estate records. We discovered them locked in a cabinet inside her secondary office in the city. Your name is on the envelope." I didn't ask questions. I just told him I'd be there in an hour. The building was a sleek corporate tower with a view that stared down at the skyline like it owned it. The kind of place you didn't just walk into, you arrived. Jonas met me in the marble lobby and handed me a leather briefcase, no bigger than a laptop bag. "It's all in there," he said. She labeled it personal, for VL only. We didn't open it. I thanked him and left without ceremony. I wasn't ready to open it there. Not with the scent of power still hanging in the air like perfume. Back home, I set the case on the table and stared at it. My initials. Her handwriting. A lock with no key. But I knew Celeste well enough to try the obvious. I grabbed the watch she left me, the one with the engraving. Sure enough, the back plate popped off with a gentle twist, revealing a tiny key tucked inside. Then, of course, she always was dramatic like that. Inside the case were papers, dozens of them, some handwritten, some printed, all organized in Celeste's meticulous order. The first page was a letter. No salutation, no date, just her voice on paper. "If you're reading this, Victor, it means you've seen through at least some of what I built. I didn't trust many people, but I always knew you had a mind that noticed things. This case contains the truths I didn't dare speak aloud. Not to the board, not to the press, not even to Darren. Especially not Darren." I kept reading. The next folder was labeled the Ward Foundation. Inside were financial records, dozens of them. On the surface, the foundation had been a charitable wing of her company. Donations to schools, women's shelters, youth entrepreneurship programs. But beneath the public filings were private correspondences with board members that revealed a different story. Large sums had been funneled through shell organizations. Some donations never reached their intended recipients. Some recipients never existed. It wasn't criminal, at least not in the way you could prove overnight, but it was manipulative. Strategic generosity with invisible strings attached. "I did it to build leverage," she wrote. "Charity gets you awards, leverage gets you protection. I needed both." The next section was marked Internal Affairs. Emails between Celeste and legal counsel, whistleblower threats, NDA drafts, settlement agreements. She hadn't just run a company, she'd contained it with precision and ruthless grace. But one email stood out, a scanned PDF from 5 years ago. Subject, regarding Darren's incident. My heart stopped. The email was short. "Celeste, we've handled the matter quietly. The footage has been erased. The intern has accepted the terms, no further leaks expected." Attached was a non-disclosure agreement signed by a young woman whose name I didn't recognize. I didn't need the details to know what it implied. My son had crossed a line and Celeste had buried it. Protected him. Groomed him for a spotlight he hadn't earned. And she hadn't told me. Not a word. The next few pages were handwritten notes again, not business-related. More like reflections, private entries never meant for public eyes. One read, "Darren is becoming someone I don't recognize. He confuses power with worth. I fed that. I taught him to play to cameras, not conscience. I'm starting to think I failed him more than I failed Victor." I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down hard. This wasn't just a woman reckoning with her past. This was a mother trying to leave behind a moral ledger. She knew her empire had cracks. She knew her legacy was stained. But she also knew that maybe, just maybe, I was the only one left who would see all of it and not set it on fire. At the very bottom of the case was a single envelope. Sealed, heavy. It wasn't addressed, but I opened it. Inside were 5 photos. Black and white, grainy. All of them taken in the early days of the company, Celeste in boardrooms, on rooftops, shaking hands with investors. But in every photo there I was too, in the background, slightly out of focus, carrying a briefcase, holding her coat, smiling at her while no one else looked. She had kept these. I don't know what struck me harder, the fact that she kept them, or the fact that no one else had ever seen them. To the world, I was the ex-husband who got written out of the empire. But to her, I was always in the frame. I closed the case slowly, not angry, not vindicated, just changed. I understood now. Celeste hadn't given me money out of guilt. She'd given me the final piece of her truth. Not for revenge, for memory, for history, for honesty. And I intended to honor that. Not by fighting Darren, not by exposing the secrets to the world, but by remembering who I was before all the silence, before the distance, before the empire swallowed us both whole. And by deciding what to do with the truth, now that it was mine alone to carry. The Ward estate stood like a stone crown on top of the hill, gated, silent, untouched, a fortress of cold perfection, with hedges too precisely to feel human and walls that looked like they hadn't heard laughter in years. I drove up with a manila folder under my arm, packed with everything Celeste never said aloud. Not memories. Evidence. I didn't call ahead. I just buzzed the gate once. Then twice. And finally, Darren's voice cracked through the intercom. Already annoyed. "Who is it?" he snapped. "It's Victor," I said. "We need to talk." A long pause followed, but then the gates groaned open like they, too, didn't want to deal with what was coming. The driveway twisted through fountains, manicured lawns, and cars with names I couldn't afford to pronounce. When Darren opened the front door, he looked like a man dragged out of a boardroom by a ghost, stiff, clean, and exhausted from pretending. "You shouldn't be here," he said, arms folded. I raised the folder. "You're going to want to see this." His eyes narrowed. "Is this a threat?" "It's your mother's handwriting," I replied. "You still trust her, don't you?" That question knocked the wind out of his composure. After a beat of silence, he stepped aside and let me in. We moved through a marble hallway lined with art nobody ever looked at, into a sleek office where glass and leather replaced anything soft or welcoming. He stayed standing while I placed the folder on his desk and opened it. "She didn't just leave you the company," I said. "She left me the truth. Not to ruin you, but to remind you of who she really was, and what she hoped you might become." He flipped through the pages, internal memos, emails, financial documents, NDAs, and then stopped when he reached that one. The hush money, the incident with the intern, the digital evidence scrubbed clean for the sake of image and inheritance. His hand froze. "You said that was handled," I said. He looked up, jaw tight. "You had no right to dig into this." "I didn't dig," I said quietly. "She left it for me. That's the difference." He shoved the papers aside and walked to the window. "She was protecting me." "No," I said. "She was protecting the empire. You just happened to be inside the gates when the fire started." He turned around sharply. "You think this makes you better than me? You left." "No," I said calmly. I stepped aside. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a mirror, and I refused to become her reflection. His fists curled at his sides. "She built all this." "Yes," I replied. "But you've confused a fortress with a home and power with love." For a moment, neither of us moved. He stared like a man on a cliff, unsure if the ground beneath him was still real. "What do you want?" he asked. "An apology? A payout?" "Nothing," I said. "That's what you still don't get. She didn't leave this behind to punish you. She left it hoping you'd remember what integrity looked like, even if it came from the man you resent most." He sat down slowly and picked up a photo from a drawer, one of the old ones, where I stood quietly in the background, holding her coat, half cropped out of the frame. "She never talked about you," he said. "Because it hurt," I replied. She didn't know how to love someone who didn't want her empire, just her honesty. That terrified her. He let the photo fall from his hand like it was radioactive. "What are you trying to prove?" he asked, voice cracking beneath the surface. "That everything she taught me was a lie?" "No," I said. "That somewhere beneath all this marble and money and legacy, she still hoped you'd choose to become someone she didn't have to clean up after." He looked at me then, not as a rival or a threat, but like a son who'd just realized the blueprint he'd been following was cracked from the start. "I thought being ruthless would earn me respect," he whispered. like it did for her. They didn't love her for being ruthless, I said. They feared her, but in private, when the doors were closed, they loved her when she was soft, when she let go. That's the side of her you buried, and the side she wanted you to find. So what now? He asked. You make a choice, I said. You can keep rewriting her story to protect your pride, or you can finally live in the truth she left behind. But do it quietly. No speeches, no press, just change, because that's what she wanted. And if you can't, then stop pretending to carry her legacy. For the first time since I arrived, the house felt smaller, not because it had shrunk, but because something heavy had lifted. The performance was over, the mask had slipped, and we were just two men, alone in a room built by a woman neither of us truly understood until it was too late. I stood up. I'll leave these with you. They're yours now. As I turned to leave, I stopped at the door. But remember, truth has a way of resurfacing, whether you're ready or not. The air outside felt different, less suffocating. As I drove away, I didn't look back. The gates closed behind me slowly, sealing a world I had finally walked out of. Not as a loser, not as a bitter ex, but as a man who knew when to stop fighting ghosts. The mansion faded into my rearview mirror, shrinking with every mile. And the man inside it? He wasn't my enemy. He was the unfinished version of a woman we both tried to love. But the truth finally had a home. The last time I visited Celeste's grave, there was no crowd. No ceremony, no press coverage or dramatic eulogies, just silence. And it wasn't an empty silence, it was full. Full of everything left unsaid between us, everything buried before she was. For all the closure that mansion confrontation gave me, something still lingered. A final thread left hanging, and it wasn't about Celeste. It was about Darren. He hadn't called, he hadn't written. Not a word since I walked out of that estate. Part of me expected that, but another part hoped that maybe he'd reach out, say something, anything. So when the letter arrived in a cream envelope, no return address, just my name in sharp, deliberate ink, I knew exactly who it was from. Inside was a handwritten note, just a few lines. Meet me where she rests, noon. No signature, no explanation, just coordinates etched in the lines of our grief. I arrived early. The cemetery was quiet, blanketed in soft wind and a gray sky, the kind of weather that makes the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. I walked past names I didn't recognize, each one a story no one was telling anymore. And then I saw him, Darren, standing in front of her grave, hands in his coat pockets, eyes locked on the marble. She hated fresh flowers, he said, without turning. Said they were too romantic for death. He gave a dry laugh. She preferred stones, permanent things. She always did, I replied. He pulled a small, smooth stone from his pocket and crouched, placing it gently on the headstone. I've been coming here every day since you left. I nodded, but I didn't speak. Some moments deserve stillness more than sound. She was complicated, he said. I used to think I had her figured out, that everything she did had a purpose, strategy, legacy. But these past few weeks, I realized how much she kept locked behind that voice of hers, how many things she never said. She was scared, I said. Scared of being known, of being loved beyond her image. He finally turned to face me. I was angry with you. Still am in some ways, but I needed you to be the one to show me what she really left behind. I waited. You know, I read every page, he continued. The letters, the documents, even the drafts of things she never sent. And it broke me. Not because of what she hid, but because I realized I'd become exactly the kind of man she was trying to protect me from. You still have time, I said, to decide whether you want to keep being him. It's not that simple. The board, the press, the expectations, none of that matters at your mother's grave, I interrupted. It never did. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't look powerful or polished. He looked young, lost, like a boy who'd lost more than a mother. He lost his compass. I want to make it right, he said. I just don't know how. Start small, I told him. Return what isn't yours. Apologize without conditions. Run the company like a man she wouldn't have to rescue. He gave a bitter laugh. That easy? No, but it's a start. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in velvet. She wanted you to have this. I found it in her safe. It was labeled Victor in the end. I hesitated, then took it. Inside the wrapping was an old silver pocket watch. Elegant, quiet, The kind Celeste would admire in shop windows but never buy for herself. She said it reminded her of you, Darren said. Precise, understated, always ticking even when ignored. I stared at the watch. It wasn't about the object, it was the message. She saw me, even in the silence, even when she shut me out. Thank you, I said softly. I'm stepping down, he said. Not publicly, not permanently, just enough to breathe, to figure out who I am without the throne. That's the best thing I've heard you say. We stood there a while longer, just the two of us, flanked by the ghosts of choices made and truths uncovered. Then he reached out his hand. For what it's worth, he said, I'm sorry. I shook it. For what it's worth, I replied, so am I. As I walked away, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt released. The kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from letting go. From knowing you faced what needed facing, that you told the truth, even when it cost you. The cemetery faded behind me as I reached my car. The pocket watch sat in my hand, ticking. Celeste was gone. Her voice, her empire, her legend, they belonged to yesterday. But the truth had finally been handed to someone strong enough to carry it. And this time I didn't look in the mirror. Not because I didn't care, but because, for the first time in years, I no longer had to. 2 weeks after the cemetery meeting, I received another unexpected delivery. A discreet manila envelope, hand-delivered, no signature, just a note inside. She kept one more thing. I think it's time. Attached to it was a claim ticket for a private deposit box at a bank I hadn't stepped foot in since the early 2000s. The kind of bank that deals in legacies, not checking accounts. I drove there that afternoon. The vault was in a side room, quiet and cold. The woman behind the desk eyed the claim ticket, typed something into her system, and then disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, she returned with a small black case, worn but locked. You'll need this, she said, handing me a tiny brass key. She left instructions it be opened in private. The room was empty but for a table and 2 chairs. I sat, placed the case in front of me, and turned the key. Inside was the Rolex. It gleamed like it had been untouched for years. Not a scratch, not a smudge. The same watch Celeste gave Darren after her 50th birthday party. The one he used to flash proudly during board meetings like it was a badge of royalty. But under the watch was something else. An envelope. My name again, this time in her handwriting. Inside were 5 photos and a letter. The photos were old, grainy. One was of me and Celeste in a hospital hallway, her holding Darren as a baby, me watching from a distance with my hands in my pockets. Another, from a charity gala, we stood on opposite sides of the stage, faces locked in unreadable expressions. The third, a candid, me on the beach smiling at someone just off camera. The fourth was of Darren and me at a company picnic. He was maybe 9 or 10, mid-laugh as I poured soda into his cup. The 5th photo was of the Rolex, still in its original box, dated 3 weeks before she gave it to Darren. The letter began with 5 words that nearly stopped my heart. I gave him your watch. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain it with excuses. She explained it with pain. She wrote about her fear that giving it to me would reopen something between us that she couldn't handle revisiting. That the watch wasn't just a gift, it was a tether. A symbol of a version of her she buried when she chose the empire over the man. She wrote, "You were never the right man for the image I needed. But you were the right man for the parts of me I was too afraid to let live. I chose control. I chose polish. I chose Darren. But I never stopped choosing you in silence. Every time I checked the time, I remembered." My hands trembled as I finished reading. Not from grief, from something deeper. A quiet reckoning. I closed the box and walked out of the bank, the Rolex in my coat pocket, her letter folded beside it. I didn't know what to do with it. Give it back to Darren? Keep it? Sell it and donate the money? But later that evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, I realized what I needed wasn't an answer. It was understanding. The Rolex had never been about time. It had been about value. It had been her way of measuring what mattered. She gave it to him because he needed public affirmation. But she left it for me because I didn't. And that's when I decided to pay it forward. Literally. The next morning, I walked into a women's shelter on the west side of town. A place Celeste and I had funded years ago back when we were still speaking. I met with the director, handed her the Rolex, the authentication documents, and said, "Sell it. Use it to build a new wing. Name it after someone who'll never be forgotten for the wrong reasons. She asked why. I just smiled and said, because some things shouldn't sit in boxes. As I walked out, I felt lighter. Like I had handed over more than a watch. I'd handed over the last piece of proof that my worth was never tied to what Celeste gave me or didn't. I was free, not from the past, but from needing it to be different. That evening, I received one final message from Darren. A text. Simple. Honest. You did more with that watch in one day than I did in 5 years. I see it now. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some stories close without a final word. The first morning after giving the Rolex away, I woke up before the alarm. No dreams, no voices, no weight on my chest. Just the quiet hum of a house that no longer echoed with the past. I got up, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat on the porch as the sun crept up behind the hills. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a call, a crisis, or a ghost. I was just here. Life had gotten simple. Not easy, but simple. I no longer carried the burden of trying to rewrite the past, nor the urge to prove myself to people who had already decided who I was. What mattered now wasn't how the story ended, it was that I finally reclaimed the pen. But fate, as always, had one last turn to take. Later that week, I received a call from Celeste's attorney, the same one who had read the will months ago. He asked to meet in person, said there was one more document, one she had added privately, outside the official channels. You were meant to receive it, he said, but only once everything else had settled. I met him at his office. Same mahogany walls, same stale cologne, but this time his tone was different, almost reverent. He handed me a small leather-bound journal, not an official document, not notarized or signed, just hers, her handwriting, page after page. Celeste kept this privately, he said. It's more of a reflection than a confession, but she wanted you to have it. I opened it slowly. The first page read, "For Victor, if he ever forgives me." And then it began. She wrote about everything. About her fears, her mistakes, the night she found out about Darren's cover-up and didn't act. The time she pushed me away not because I failed, but because I came too close. She admitted to loving me in ways she couldn't sustain, to needing control more than connection, and to building a life around a version of herself that could be admired but never truly held. She confessed that the company was her armor, that Darren was her mirror, and that I was her conscience. The piece she buried to feel strong but always missed when the lights went out. She ended the journal with this. If you're reading this, it means you stayed true to yourself, and that gives me peace. Don't look back. Don't rewrite. Just start the clock again, from now. I closed the journal and let the silence hold me. It wasn't sorrow I felt or anger. It was a calm kind of ache, like touching a wound that no longer bled, but still remembered the pain. I left the law office and walked down to the lake near my home. The same lake where Celeste and I once sat as kids, skipping stones and dreaming about futures we never quite reached. I sat on a bench, the journal in my lap, and watched as the water rippled under the wind. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the pocket watch she'd left me. Tick, tick, tick. Time hadn't stopped for either of us, but maybe, just maybe, it could start again, with different rules. That night, I began writing again. Not reports, not rebuttals, not unsent letters, just thoughts, hopes, visions for a life no longer shaped by shadows. I started volunteering at the shelter, the same one where the Rolex had gone. I taught classes on financial literacy, helped men and women rebuild what life had taken. Not because I was trying to fix them, but because I finally knew how to live beside broken things without needing to control them. Darren and I spoke occasionally, not like friends, not like enemies, just like men who survived something too large to name. He stayed away from the spotlight for a while, took a role behind the curtain. I think he needed space to become someone outside her shadow. I respected that. And quietly, I rooted for him. On the anniversary of Celeste's death, I returned to her grave, alone. I brought a stone, flat, smooth, engraved with a single word, begin. I placed it beside the others, then sat for a while, not to mourn, but to acknowledge, to say in silence what couldn't be said in life. I see you, I whispered, and I'm finally okay being seen too. As I stood to leave, I looked at the sky, soft clouds drifting in the morning light, like time itself was exhaling. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. The empire had fallen into other hands. The past had spoken its last word, but my story, the one that mattered, had just begun. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't getting back what was taken. It's becoming the version of yourself they never saw coming. And with that, the clock started over. So now I ask you, if the people you once trusted left you out of everything, everything you helped build, everything you gave your life to, would you fight to reclaim your place? Or would you walk away and let them taste their own silence? Let us know in the comments below, because stories like this aren't just fiction. They're reflections of family, of power, of betrayal, and sometimes of the quiet strength it takes to rise above them all. If this story struck a nerve, if it reminded you of someone you used to be or someone you could become, then don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Revenge is Mine for more gripping tales of redemption, revelation, and the sweet taste of justice served cold. We post new stories every week, each one raw, real, and unforgettable. And when you hit that notification bell, you won't miss the moment the tables finally turn. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we remind the world, revenge isn't petty, it's earned. Until next time, stay sharp, stay strong, and never forget, they never see it coming.